From our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., it's Kickfannie's Big Thinking with Akia Garnett, CEO for Brand Builder and creator of Tuesday Branding. Welcome to today's show. So, Akia, what's new?
Hey, it's Akia Garnett, your CEO for Brand Builder and your host for Kickfannie's Big Thinking with Akia Garnett. Big Thinking is part of Tuesday Branding. It's a full day of branding programming, all for free, for small business owners and entrepreneurs. We are out of the nation's capital. You can find out more about Tuesday Branding at AkiaGarnett.com. You can listen direct to Kickfannie's Big Thinking at Kickfannie.com. What's new is what's happening in the headlines. It looks like we've got a second case of Ebola that's been confirmed. Why is this important in the United States? Why is this important to us? Because it does have the potential, the ability to impact our global economy, and we just need to make sure that we're all vigilant and doing as much as we possibly can to combat it from where we stand. It looks like that case was confirmed down in Dallas. It was, I believe, associated with a worker who was affiliated with the case of the first known Ebola case in the States. And so find out more about that and a show that we're doing, a second show that we're doing with the Embassy of Liberia in the United States on the Akia Garnett Show. I'm spending time with the Ministry Counselor for Press and Public Affairs, who's stationed in Washington, D.C., and we're talking about their initiative to get more supplies over to Liberia to continue combating the virus there, and also helping to make sure that any cases in the States are cut off, because we just can't afford for any more of these things to happen around here, or we're going to have a real problem. And so that's what's in the news today. Here's what's happening on Kickfannie's Big Thinking. I'm spending time today with Mr. Michael Miller. He is a very experienced attorney who has done a tremendous amount of work in the States and globally. He's the former business line compliance officer for ING Direct. He's been global head of legal and compliance and the company secretary for ING Direct. He's a treasurer for the board of directors for the National Network to End Domestic Violence. He's been vice president of legal for the head of commercial and litigation at Tata Communications. He's done a tremendous amount of work in the States and abroad. He's traveled around the world helping companies stay out of trouble legally. And he's going to be spending time with us today helping us understand what we can do as well. Hey there, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm very good. How are you?
Great. Welcome to Kickfannie's Big Thinking.
My pleasure to be here.
I just want to start out, first of all, by talking about the work that you did with ING Direct. What a hot brand. I remember when they rolled out with that first branding campaign and how exciting it was with the orange, and to know that you were a part of that back then was great. What was that like for you?
Oh, it was an incredible time. I joined ING Direct probably in early 2003. And in the States, they'd been launched for a couple years already, but the brand was still very much in a growth stage. And getting in on the ground floor, helping them build the foundation of the brand and the organization, and growing with that organization was an incredible experience and a lot of fun. Wow!
Did you know at that time that you were going to be working in the Netherlands? Because I can see that you worked in the States with them for a few years before you took off abroad.
No, actually, I had no idea that I would be heading to the Netherlands. And actually, by the time I'd spent all my time in the Netherlands, I'd worked for ING Direct almost twice as long in the Netherlands as I had in the U.S. So certainly in the beginning, I had no idea that I would be that the opportunity would take me around the world.
It must have been an exciting time also in the financial market when you started with them, right? I mean, we were doing well.
We really were. It was 2003 to 2006 was a fun time.
Yeah.
The market was humming along. We were just coming out of the .com bubble, and as it were, we were going into the financial services bubble. But it was a fun time. Everything was exciting. There was a lot of growth. A lot of new opportunities commercially for financial services and for the brand of and the business model of ING Direct. So it was a great time, a lot of fun.
Did you see the handwriting on the wall, Mike?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, everybody's going to stand at where we are today and look back and have 2020 vision. But I think there was a certain feeling or understanding with most people in the sector that things were going along and were happening probably at an unsustainable level. And I think for the most part, people kind of knew it was going to happen. But certainly the magnitude and the scale of the crisis was probably surprising to me as well as it was for a lot of other folks also.
Wow. Now, one of the things that I know you've mentioned in the past is that ING, and we're going back to ING here, ING grew organically versus other schools of thought which are associated with acquiring and building that way. What were some of the benefits that you saw in that? Because I know that from a small business perspective here, there are lots of CEOs I talk to who say, yeah, I want to be global. And in my mind, global is truly global, meaning you have global representation in many, many, many countries. But I think what many CEOs mean is they want to operate an international arm of their business. And that starts with one country at a time. And that country, in many ways, has many cities and provinces and all the other things. And so just getting established very well in one other country is a big deal. From your perspective, how does that play out when it comes to ING developing organically versus through acquisition?
Well, I think the biggest benefit of growing organically is that your ability to control a bit more the culture of that organization, and that a lot of times that's critically important, especially if your idea of your business is a bit unique, is fresh in the market, and you don't want it tainted necessarily by some of the old school thinking. So if you started organically, you have a bit more control over that. Now, there's also two schools of thought with respect to the cost of doing that. To make an acquisition, sometimes it's incredibly expensive, but also to grow a business it can be incredibly expensive too. So, there's two schools of thought there, and I think you need to really do your due diligence and understand the risk of doing both. But surely, starting a company organically is very exciting. You have to rely heavily upon local resources to help you get that business up and running and to grow it.
In your experience or from your research, how long before a company says, I think that I want to develop a branch or an FDI in this country to the time that they actually hang out the shingle for the grand opening? How long of a process can that be?
Well, it can last anywhere from I think usually at all the shortest that you're probably ever going to be able to do it is probably a year, but it can last several years, and it depends on the amount of due diligence you do beforehand. Certainly, it's going to pay dividends as you begin to launch your company. The more due diligence you do, but it also, what sector are you in? What market is it? Is it heavily regulated? All those sorts of things will come into play. And, if it's a relatively non-regulated, simple market that you're going to go into, then you can do it fairly quickly. But the more regulated it is, the longer it's going to take, especially if you have a regulator or authority that's going to monitor not only your launch, but the services that you do provide to your customers. It can take quite some time.
When businesses, when they have legal counsel, Mike, they don't always take full advantage of the time and the talent that they have from the attorney. Sometimes it's more reactive in terms of the relationship. If we're going after an opportunity, let's run this by legal. If we've gotten into some trouble, perhaps, or if we've got a potential breach in contract, or we've just come up on a term and condition that needs some finagling, let's reach out to legal. But you've got some points that you've made about sticking to your core values on the front end, and how legal can help you do that in a more proactive way versus just using them for the keep us out of trouble perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're going into a new market, one of the things that obviously is going to be a subject of your due diligence is going to be the legal environment. And that's going to be incredibly important, not only from the organization and how it operates, but also from the products that that company may offer to customers. So knowing the legal environment in which you're going to operate is critically important to the future success of your company. One of the things that I think most attorneys, it's been drilled into us over the last few years, is that we need to be more proactive as a service organization and to get to sort of anticipate where the business is going to go and help them know the risk associated with any endeavor before you actually get into it.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's not possible, especially if you're going into a new market situation. So engaging your attorneys early in that process is really critical to the future success of that effort. Understanding what the environment is and what your resources are in that environment from a legal perspective is quite critical, and sometimes you're not going to know that up front. Matter of fact, I would say probably most of the time you won't know, especially the local resources, beforehand. So as you start to go into that business or evaluate that business opportunity, you're going to want to develop sort of your go-to players from a legal perspective in that new market, and really start to develop not only the due diligence but also your relationship with them and get a level of comfort with them. And maybe you have to shop around a bit to make sure that you've got the quality that you need from your legal resources. But developing that relationship with them and that comfort level with them, where you really can rely on them and you really can get the full extent of the information you need from them, and you can have a lot of confidence in what they're telling you, is critically important, because the last thing you want to do is you want to be in a situation where you actually need them and you're questioning whether or not you can trust them, or you can trust the advice that they're giving you.
Wow.
So that's incredibly important to spend the time, get to know your legal counsel, get that comfort level with them, and really foster that as an ongoing relationship.
Wow, and that's really important to hear you say, because here, at least in the States, we are born and bred to believe that the customer is always right. It's in our bottles, it's in our formulas, that the customer is always right, and when the customer comes or a prospect comes your way and they've got money in their pocket, you don't leave that money on the table. You find a way to do the work for that customer and to save the day for that customer. And by the way, to earn some additional revenue for your company. Heaven forbid you turn away a prospect and an opportunity to save their day and an opportunity to add to your own bottom line. But you say that's not always a good thing, and that we need to stick to our core values, and that sometimes we do have to turn away customers because it will be more detrimental to our brand if we don't. Can you talk about that?
Sure, absolutely, and indeed the customer is not always right. I think one of the most difficult things to do for any smaller company to do is to have the discipline to maintain its core values and to not dilute itself to the point where it cannot provide the services or deliver the services in the manner in which the customer really wants to receive them along the way. And it's really difficult, you touched on it quite well, it's really difficult for companies to have that discipline to say, you know what, we are not set up in a way that we can really attack this opportunity and actually do it to the level that we're going to feel comfortable and that we feel matches our brand. Mm-hmm. So those companies really sometimes have to take a harsh stance and say, okay, it looks like a great opportunity, and it may actually even be a great opportunity, but do we have the internal resources, the internal capabilities necessary to actually deliver what we want to deliver here? And, attorneys are often viewed as being the roadblock or the group that always just says no. Yeah. And you want to make sure that you have the right attorneys that, they're going to give it a very objective, thorough analysis. But you also want attorneys that are going to be able to say to you and be quite confident in saying to you, maybe this is not quite the right opportunity for you because you don't have all of the resources necessary to deliver. And that may may be especially true if the market is regulated, the target market is heavily regulated, and you're coming from an unregulated environment. It's just one consideration, but it certainly is one that can have a profound impact on the organization and the financial requirements and resources that it will take to build up those internal controls necessary to go into that regulated market.
Wow. And when you have those kinds of conversations in the States with your clients versus some of the work that you did in Europe, where there's perhaps a difference in customer being right all the time, or this practical versus pragmatic viewpoint of business and doing business, how does that conversation differ abroad versus here?
Well, some things are the same, but certainly some are different. What's probably going to be the same is your internal capabilities and what you're able to actually do. You want to make sure that you're staying true to yourself and true to your core values, because that's what you're good at doing. And that's how you've been able to build your business to the point of where it's at. So anything that would sort of deviate from that, you need to look at, in my opinion, quite critically and make sure that it's something that you can take on and really develop as a new core value. But some of the things that are going to different that oftentimes people may take for granted are some of the cultural elements in the new market. Really getting to know that new culture and understand it is going to be a long process, and one, quite frankly, that you may never ever master. And having lived overseas for a few years, it's kind of funny that I think I learned more about my own culture in my time overseas than I did actually about the new culture. Because as Americans, we certainly take our own culture for granted, just because we know it, or at least we think we know it. And when you experience a different way of doing things, it really does open your eyes up and make you question, well, why do we do these things in the U.S.? Or why do we automatically assume these certain things in the U.S. when we approach a new problem to solve?
Yeah.
But the cultural elements from a new country can be incredibly exciting, but it can also can doom your business from the start. So getting immersed in that, if you can take advantage of some resources, not only reading them, but actually have the opportunity to take some courses on the new culture, it was one of the things that I was able to do and found it incredibly helpful and useful in my understanding and my long-term success in the new environment.
So then how do you help companies stick to their core values but not miss opportunities to grow when the market truly is shifting? Because there's a difference between a new trend that's going to fizzle out versus something that is really going to be here, it's going to stay. At one point, people thought social media, for example, was a trend and that it would go away. And they soon learned that it wasn't, that this was really the new way of doing business and that it was here to stay. How do you, in legal, determine the difference, or understand the difference and then prepare to help your customers?
Well, it's a difficult thing sometimes to know what is just a trend or a fad versus what is actually a market shift. The law is sometimes slow to evolve and adapt to new technologies, and we saw that with the advent of the internet, and social media is probably one of those things where the law has been a bit slow to evolve and to adapt to it as well. That sometimes is a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. It's a good thing in the sense that hopefully we're getting the laws right once we do put them in place, and that we don't have knee-jerk reactions with legislation. But it can be slow in that you're entering into a new market with no guidance whatsoever on how to legally provide those services in that new market segment. So understanding, it's critically important, I think, for your counsel to understand what your business is and what this new market is, and to have a good basis of sort of the core values of your company. I have that sort of in their back pocket and as And I think also having a good culture within your own organization. Often in compliance, at least, you're always talking about a compliance culture. That can actually save you quite a bit. When I was in compliance, I used to remark to our CEO that I would much rather have a compliant culture with maybe less than perfect systems than perfect systems and a non-compliant culture.
Sure.
Because that compliant culture is going to guide you through those difficult times. And if you approach things with the mindset that you want to do the right thing for the customer, then a lot of times that's going to help save you, even if the law shifts or new laws are enacted. At least if you've done the right thing for the customer and treated them fairly, you're going to be in a much better situation.
And what are some of the landmines that you see companies say 25 million and between 25 million and 100 million? What are some of the landmines that you see them constantly having to avoid at that size?
Well, I think diluting their efforts is certainly one of the areas where you can, at that size, you're still sort of in the startup mentality where turning business away is just something that sometimes is not possible. You need all the business that you can get. So you start to dilute your efforts, and in turn, you sort of dilute your core values. You take on too many new projects and too many new areas where you don't have the internal capabilities or resources to actually deliver upon those requests, those customer requests. So you want to make sure that you have the discipline, or you have the financial resources and the patience and the fortitude to bring on those new capabilities and get them trained and get them on board properly. Or you need to be able to have the fortitude to stand firm and say, okay, we're not going to be all things for all people, and we're going to focus on what we deliver and deliver it very well. That's certainly, probably at that size, one of the things that a lot of companies struggle with is how do we grow our business without sacrificing the quality of what we do? And that's if you can master that, you're on your way to your next step in your growth.
Great. Wow. So I'm gonna ask you this again, like just so that people know that they heard you right the first time. In this country where we're born and bred to believe that the customer is always right, and we will do anything to make sure that we can service this customer. Your mindset is that the customer is not always right.
No, absolutely not. And having lived overseas, you can certainly see the differences maybe between sort of the consumer being right here in the U.S., even when they're wrong, sort of that mentality that most Americans actually have versus somewhere else. One of the things that was quite unique in the ING Direct model was that we wanted to make sure that we were very true to what we wanted to achieve. And we knew up front that we probably weren't going to be the preferred bank of all people. But for the people that did choose us, we wanted to make sure that we delivered the experience perfectly. And we wanted to make sure that what we said we were going to do, we actually did. And we not only did it, we did it to the level that we wanted it to be. Mm-hmm. And if you start to dilute those efforts as you start to grow your business, and you have a new customer come to you and say, okay, hey, can you help me here with this, and it's outside of what you do, evaluating that opportunity and making sure that that you've done your due diligence on it properly. I mean, it could be an incredibly attractive opportunity, and so you don't want to automatically just say no to it, of course. But having the foresight to make sure that you've done your due diligence properly, and that you fully understand what that actually means to your organization, or you may even know up front that this is not what we believe is the future of the market segment, so we don't want to go into it. Those things are incredibly important. Turning your away customers in the U.S. is akin to signing your own death warrant.
Sure.
But you need to also be able to explain to those customers, look, we understand and we value you as a customer. We want to make sure that whatever we do for you meets your approval and your satisfaction and gives you exactly what you want. And unfortunately, we just don't have the capabilities that you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may want to look somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that type of stance and with your customers, I think, they'll appreciate it in the long run that you've been honest with them and you've let them know that you're not capable of providing the service. And at the same time, you're not diluting your internal resources and efforts into an opportunity that maybe is just a one-off, or you just don't have the resources internally to grow your business in that area. Those will pay dividends down the road for you, in all kinds of legal ways, whether it be litigation, for a contract breach, or you've entered into a regulated market and you're not prepared to address all the regulatory demands of that market.
Mm-hmm.
That'll save you an enormous amount of time and in all different ways.
Wow. So then you take all of your experience that you had abroad in the Netherlands and traveling to different countries and so forth and helping them establish brand presence in those jurisdictions, and you come back and you do some work with Tata Communications. How was it immersing yourself back into the American business culture? I know that you were still focused on international work, but how was that experience for you?
I knew that I would go back through culture shock coming back to the U.S., but I have to admit it was a bit greater than even I anticipated. I thought by being an American coming back to America, sure, I had sort of adapted and appreciated my new culture in the Netherlands quite a bit. But I just assumed that, just because I lived here for the vast majority of my life, that it would be, I would understand it, and that would be a step up, and then it'd be easy just to adapt to it.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, learning about your own culture sometimes more when you live in a different culture is very true here. And, Americans, we often think that we're the greatest country in the world, and maybe we are, but certainly we don't do everything perfectly. And seeing those things done in other cultures, sometimes you're like, oh, wow, that's a neat way of doing something. And coming back here to the States sometimes from that culture, from a foreign culture back and re-immersing yourself into American culture, you kind of get caught sometimes on those little things that, oh wow, I wish we could go back and do that, the way we did it in the other country.
Yeah. Wow.
It's more sometimes an emotional stumbling block sometimes.
Yeah.
But it takes a while and you get to it, and it's great to be back in the U.S.
Well, yeah, I think we are definitely done an injustice as youth when we are taught that American culture is pretty much the only culture to focus on. So it's to our own detriment when we go to other countries and we do experience life there and we see that it ain't half bad, and then we come back and we go, oh man, that sure was a lot of fun, and I wish we could do this, and I wish we could. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and I do think that we could do more in the States to help us begin to like other cultures when we're younger.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that would actually help us in that respect is, and maybe also in our business opportunities, if you see something that works well, it doesn't necessarily mean that your current way of doing things, whether it be in your own company or as an American sort of cultural issue, doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. It just means that there might be a slightly better way of doing something. And so we should all have that sort of mental flexibility and openness to be willing to explore new ways of doing things. And again, that doesn't just go for cultural issues, but it certainly goes for your own business opportunities as well. Yeah.
And so the work that you did for Tata Communication, was it a lot different than the work you did for ING, or was it similar?
It actually was pretty different. When I was in the Netherlands, I had pretty much global responsibility. From soup to nuts responsibility. But when I came back here, I was more focused on commercial, transactional type issues and litigation. So it was pretty different, and then also obviously in a different industry as well. So that was quite different.
Mm-hmm. So then, the other countries that you got a chance to visit, Mike, can you just run down the line for us a little bit?
Sure. On a regular basis, often went to the UK, Germany, Spain, Italy. Those were, I think, where we had our biggest businesses.
Mm-hmm.
But also had the opportunity to go to Japan and spend a little bit of time there, which was incredibly interesting. Quite honestly, it's the only place where I stepped off the plane and just could feel that there was a major difference, and that
wow.
I really didn't know what was going on.
Oh my gosh! Why do you say that? What happened?
Well, I think the one thing that I learned from my time there was you're just not going to understand all the cultural subtleties,
mm-hmm.
and you're going to make a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. But if you they're quite accommodating people. They understand you don't understand all these issues, and so if you can just sort of grin and bear it and be nice about it, they will do the same.
Wow. Well, I mean, in all those countries, it must have been very interesting because you were not only there to, of course, understand the business that you were in, but also the legalities of and the legal infrastructure of those countries as well. I mean, I would imagine that you had a tremendous amount of research to do before you got there, and then everything you learned, you had to relearn when you got there legally. Is that was that difficult?
It was difficult, yes, but it was incredibly exciting and interesting. If you just focus on the European market just for a moment, with the European directives and the European Commission, it really is starting to get a bit of uniformity or conformity around the legal frameworks mm-hmm. of the various sort of areas of law. But there's still, all of those directives have to be translated into local law. So it's the equivalent of a federal law being sort of the basis, and then each state still having to implement that federal law. That's sort of the way that it works in the European world. So even if you have, a directive that is on point for a particular issue, you still will have, every country in the European Union implementing it probably slightly different in some way. So although you can look at something from sort of a principled perspective, and certainly when you're developing, global policies, that's what you want to work on is off the directive. But you also have to be a bit flexible in those policies to allow for local nuances in not only the legal environment, but also sort of cultural environment. In the financial services world, money laundering and sort of customer KYC measures is incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
So there was the third directive that covered that in the European world. Implementing that in each country was slightly different because some of the resources that we may have used in the United States, for example, doing a criminal background check, is just not available in some countries, and so you just have to allow for some flexibility, be willing to explore different possibilities of covering the same issues. But again, it sort of goes back to understanding that maybe there's not a better way of doing things. It's just a different way of doing the same thing.
Sure. Well, I would imagine that while you were in all of these different countries, you got to cross off some things on your bucket list. But this is it's certainly from a professional perspective, it was an incredibly rewarding experience, but also from a personal perspective, it was a lot of fun. It was not my first stint of living in Europe, but it was a lot of fun to spend as much time as we did there. And yes, I was able to check a couple of things off the bucket list. Well, my producers are always wanting to know what's left on your bucket list. So tell us what's there now.
Well, two of my daughters were born in the Netherlands, so that was interesting. But wow. At some point, I would like to be able to take them back there, and maybe even live there again, just so they can experience it when they're old enough to appreciate the differences. That's the one thing I guess that I maybe regret as a strong word, but it's one of the things my youngest when we left there was 4. So she's not going to really appreciate all the things as her older sisters will. Going back there is certainly, or having another opportunity in another country would certainly be on the bucket list.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you've been bitten by the international bug, and
yeah, well, it's funny. You find those folks, and certainly 7 years is a long time to spend overseas.
Yeah.
But certainly there's a lot of expats that are completely bitten with it, and they spend their entire career doing it, and it comes at some personal sacrifice. You're away from family and that thing, and those sorts of things. But the cultural enrichment that you get to experience, and usually the professional development that comes along with your expat assignments, is an incredibly rewarding experience.
Wow. I've been spending time with Mike Miller. He is the former business line compliance officer for ING Direct in the States. He's also the former global head of legal and compliance and company secretary for ING Direct in the Netherlands. He's done some work as vice president and legal head of commercial and litigation for Tata Communications in the States. And he's also the treasurer for the board of directors for the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Hey, Mike, one parting bit of advice for small business owners who are thinking about going global.
Stay true to your core values. You've chosen those core values for a reason, and you've been able to grow your business because of those core values. Don't abandon them just because you want to go global. In fact, those will be the things that actually are your lifeline when you're on your way to future growth.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us on Kick Fanny's Big Thinking with Akia Garnett.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
Great. You've been listening to Kick Fanny's Big Thinking. Thank you so much. And remember that Kick Fanny's Big Thinking is part of Tuesday Branding. You can find out more about Tuesday Branding at akiagarnett.com. Listen direct to Kick Fanny's Big Thinking at Kickfannie.com. And we'll see you again for another week of Tuesday Branding.
You've been listening to Kick Fanny's Big Thinking with Akia Garnett, a Kick Fanny production. Akia Garnett is a Kickfannie.com contributor, and she's CEO for Brand Builder and a national columnist for Minority Business Entrepreneur magazine, a leading source in supplier diversity and inclusion. Be sure to join Akia for Tuesday Branding on social media when she brings news from across all platforms for small business owners and entrepreneurs all day, starting with the Akia Garnett Show, 10 a.m. Eastern, and Kick Fanny's Big Thinking with Akia Garnett at 6 p.m. Eastern, ending with My Brand Chat on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern. See the full Tuesday lineup at Kickfannie.com and AkiaGarnett.com. And we'll see you next week on Kick Fanny's Big Thinking with Akia Garnett.